course. So as we near the end of the Iranian dynasties that ruled over Iran for more than 1300 years, from the start of the Rashidun Caliphate in 642 Common Era up to the end of the Pahlavi dynasty in 1979, what we learn is that the dynasties rose and fell more from internal strife, greed, lust for power, corruption, deceit, and not least of all, religious hegemony. These were the very factors that also contributed to the decline and fall of the Sassanian Empire. Hopefully, what this course has taught us is what the Spanish philosopher Jorge Santayana famously said: those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So Nasir al-Din Qajar, he formed a cavalry unit known as the Persian Cossack Brigade. The Cossacks were an East European community. They were supposed to be democratic, semi-military, and all that. So on that premise, Nasir al-Din Qajar formed the Persian Cossack Brigade. So the Pahlavi dynasty started when Reza Khan, an officer in the Persian Cossack Brigade, staged a coup dubbed the Persian coup d'etat against the Qajar ruler Ahmad Shah in 1921. In 1925, the Majlis, which was a legislative body instituted by the Qajar ruler Muzaffar al-Din Shah, deposed Ahmad Shah and made Reza Shah the Shah of Iran. He called himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, taking the name from the Pahlavi language spoken during the Sassanian era. This was the initiation of the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah was an ambitious man, and he introduced many reforms that were strongly opposed by the Shia clergy in Iran. He was a dictator, nevertheless. When Reza Shah did not comply with the British demand to expel Germans from Iran in 1941, at the height of World War II, the British launched an attack on Reza Shah, forcing him to abdicate the throne. His son, Muhammad Reza Shah, became the next ruler. Muhammad Reza Shah was committed to his father's reforms. He assured the country that he would be a constitutional monarch, a promise he had no intention to keep. Both Muhammad Reza Shah and his father Reza Shah were dictatorial administrators. Now, current information that's coming out suggests that Muhammad Reza Shah was not as dictatorial as commonly believed. In 1951, the Majlis appointed Muhammad Mossadegh as prime minister. The prime minister and the monarch, Muhammad Shah, could not see eye to eye regarding the country's governance, which created internal strife, causing Muhammad Reza Shah to flee Iran. The United States and Britain were concerned about a communist takeover of Iran under a Mossadegh administration. In 1953, they staged a coup, overthrowing the prime minister and reinstated Muhammad Reza Shah as head of the country. Muhammad Reza Shah dismissed the parliament and launched the White Revolution, which was a reform program to modernize Iran. An exiled Islamic leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, was worried about the Shah's reforms, taking Iran back to pre-Islamic days. Displeased with Muhammad Reza Shah's reforms, Khomeini called for the monarch's ouster. Many Iranians, poor and unemployed, under the Shah, aligned themselves with Khomeini. A newspaper article in 1978 denigrating Khomeini roused religious zealots to protest against the Shah. In 1979, the Shah fled Iran under the guise of taking a vacation. Khomeini returned from exile, I think it was in France, returned to Iran from France and declared Iran an Islamic Republic. Now, the fate of the Zoroastrian under the Pahlavi dynasty. The formation of the Society for the Amelioration of the Conditions of Zoroastrians in Persia we talked about last week, and the arrival of Manekji Limji Hataria in Iran were a blessing for the Iranian Zoroastrians. Zoroastrians moved to Tehran from Yazd and Kerman to take advantage of the economic opportunities in the capital. The Parsis in India, having established strong relationships with the British, used this rapport to get the English to get Iran's ruling class to improve the conditions of the Zoroastrians in Iran. Zoroastrians, male and female, were given opportunities for education in schools funded by the Parsis, as well as British and American missionaries. Zoroastrians could now engage in business, which was formerly disallowed. So they could engage in business activities and many Iranian Zoroastrian businesses flourished. So the Muslims now started patronizing pre-Islamic culture, such as public readings of the Shahnameh. Educated Muslims took to calling the government for more humane treatment of the Zoroastrians. That does not mean that the Zoroastrians were in any way considered equal to the Muslims. But the elite, the educated people, just treated the Zoroastrians a little better than the ruffians or the uncouth people of the country. Around 1890, a young Zoroastrian, Kaikhosro Shahrukh, came into prominence as a champion of Zoroastrian rights. He became the Zoroastrian representative in the Majlis from 1909 to 1940. In 1936, schools were constructed in Tehran for boys and girls, and one of the best schools at that time was a school called Firuz Behram. Shahrukh also challenged conventional Zoroastrian practices, proclaiming many of the rituals and practices contravene Zarathustra's teachings. Under Reza Shah and his sons, Zoroastrians were given important positions in the army and government. Farang Mehr, the well-known scholar, educator, politician, held high-level government positions, including Deputy Prime Minister of Finance and Chancellor of Pahlavi University and Tehran University. Farang Mehr petitioned to the Shah to bring the skilled Parsi workers from India to Iran. That program was actually in place, I know for a fact, because I had tried to take advantage of that. So there was a gentleman called Barjur Nargowala who had office in the Tata headquarters at Bombay House in Flower Fountain, which you almost know. So I had tried and I wasn't successful. They were looking for engineers and accountants and business backgrounds. Now, the constitution and Iranian nationalism also was started in 1906 by Muzaffar al-Din Shah. Now, nationalism meant to be inclusive and unifying all Iranians. While this was advantageous to the Zoroastrians, the universalism was articulated as a historic and thus national past, stripping the Zoroastrians and in turn Iran of the Zoroastrian religious past. So the Zoroastrianism aspect was not part of this nationalism. Reza Shah shaped Iranian nationalism by diminishing the influence of Islam on Iran. Reza Shah placed a furor on Iranian Air Force planes and the national bus service. Kaikhosro Shahrukh and Reza Shah established a strong relationship. Reza Shah invited the Gatha scholar Din Shah Irani as a leader of the Parsi delegation to Iran. During Reza Shah's administration and continuing into his son Muhammad's rule, Zoroastrian values and teachings were actively promoted in lectures and articles. Reza Shah's commitment was to bring to the forefront the greatness of pre-Islamic Iran. The Zoroastrian dictum of gender equality was put in place with women no longer relegated to the status of second-class citizens. Women had an equal voice and equal place in society. Reza Shah's reforms spearheaded the formation of Zoroastrian associations, the Anjumans, throughout Iran. The Anjuman in Tehran made Kaikhosro Shahrukh president. The Anjuman was maintained by businessmen and had no priestly participation. Businessmen provided funds for the community's welfare. Under Muhammad Reza Shah, the modernization and secularization of Iranian society reduced Muslim prejudice against Zoroastrians, but it also reduced assimilation among the Zoroastrians in Yazd and Kerman. This brought about changes in religious practices. So then Muhammad Reza Shah started this white revolution, and he celebrated with pomp 2,500 years of continuous Persian monarchy since the rise of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great. Under Muhammad Reza Shah, pre-Islamic history was being taught in schools, creating opportunities for all Iranians to learn from the Zoroastrian religion and Iran's glory days. The Muslim clergy resented these reforms, would revitalize the Zoroastrian religion at the cost of Islam. Rebels like Khomeini called for a revolution, putting an end to the Pahlavi dynasty. So then now comes the 1979 revolution. Khomeini comes to power. Reforms in place for the Pahlavis were hampered with the intervention of foreign powers to control Iran's oil resources. Muhammad Reza Shah dismissed the parliament and launched the White Revolution. The clerics and wealthy landowners were not happy with this. They feared a disruption in their wealth and influence. The Shah was repressive, minimizing political participation from opposition parties. I think he eliminated the Communist Party today or something like that. It's in the material that I sent out last week. Protests against the Shah were met with censorship, harassment, torture, and oppression. Ayatollah Khomeini, an exiled cleric, called for the overthrow of the Shah, which happened when he came to Iran. In the post-Zoroastrian dilemma, in the post-1979 revolution, from the time of Manaji Limji Hotera's arrival in Iran until the Pahlavi dynasty, the Zoroastrians relatively enjoyed improved conditions. All that changed post-revolution. The formation of the Islamic Republic took a heavy toll on Zoroastrians in Iran. Zoroastrian temples were once again ransacked, and Khomeini's picture was placed next to that of Zarathustra in the temples, Zoroastrian temples. Limits on the rights of minority religious groups were imposed. Zoroastrians and other minorities could elect representatives to the parliament, but they could not be elected to represent a Muslim electorate. Prosecution of Zoroastrians resurfaced, with them being labeled as impure, najis, and gabbars and kafirs. Another pejorative was calling the Zoroastrians atash parast, or fire worshippers, which we are certainly not. Some non-Zoroastrian Iranians enamored by the Zoroastrian past and the enlightened message of Zarathustra sought conversion to the faith. But the conversion was not carried out because, according to Islam law, if you convert from Islam to any other religion, that is a crime punishable by death. So while the religion does not prescribe conversion, it was the law of the land that prohibited conversion. Job discrimination was something the Zoroastrians had to endure, throwing them into poverty. Zoroastrian feasts and festivals were permitted as long as they were out of sight of the Muslim population. An ideology of us Muslim and them non-Muslim developed. There was a Mobidyar who approached the Islamic parliament to include Zarathustra's birthday in the Iranian calendar, which was denied. And the Mobidyar was disqualified from being nominated to the parliament. That bad. Notwithstanding all these travails, the Zoroastrians show remarkable resiliency in accord with Zarathustra's timeless teachings. And that brings us kind of to an end to the dynasties and the material of this course. Now, I want to take a few moments to share with you some tidbits. These points that I'm about to make are not directly related to the course, but they have an indirect correlation. And I think you'll appreciate that. So, but we all know that the Zoroastrian religion has influenced all the major religions, particularly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the typical argument is, oh, well, yeah, we influence the idea of heaven and hell, resurrection, judgment day. But there's a lot more influence than just that. And this, what I'm going to share with you, is given by, not by Zoroastrians or not by Maria Ravatna, but by Christian ministers. So in the Bible, we have the Amesha Spentas actually, and they are called the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Now, the Amesha Spentas, you know, Haurumazda, Asha, Veshta, Vomana, so on and so forth. In the Bible, you have wisdom as one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, discernment of truth, Asha, counsel, intuition, mental acuity, Vahumana, good mind, knowledge, devotion to God's laws, Aramati, strength, which is Shatravirya, fortitude, and again, fear of the Lord does not mean a survival fear, but only by obeying his laws can we attain eternal peace. What is Amartat? Eternal, immortal bliss, eternal bliss. Now, this actually is in the Bible, and I'm giving you references over here if you're interested, particularly Isaiah chapter 11, 1 and 2. There was a scholar, a Zoroastrian scholar, by the name of A.V. Williams Jackson. He has written a paper where he shows that the idea of Shatravirya is actually in the Pater Noster, or the Lord's Prayer, which is the fundamental prayer of Christians. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, all that. So this is something that A.V. Williams Jackson has actually stated. And now, who was A.V. Williams Jackson? Another claim to fame. He was the advisor, PhD advisor of Dr. Manekji Nasarwanji Dhalla. Dr. Dhalla got his PhD in Zoroastrian studies from Columbia University in New York. And A.V. Williams Jackson was his advisor. Now, I want to share with you the influence of the religion, Zoroastrian religion, on world thought. And this is going to be a little interesting, I think. So the Greeks, after coming in contact with the Persians in the Achaemenid dynasty, became aware of Zarathustra as a Persian founder of a faith with profound moral principles for all of humankind. Pythagoras. I'm sorry? Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Plato, Plutarch, they all talk about Hormazdes, Armenius, Aristotle, Pliny, and Agathias, among others who make references to Zarathustra in their respective philosophical works. Now, the West is not very happy to acknowledge how much Persia influenced Greece in various disciplines. This point is very clearly stated by Professor Charles F. Horn, who was a professor at City College of New York, and he's written a book. And in that book, he says, Greek philosophers bestowed on Zoroaster the title of the ancient sage, but they took advantage of his fame to attribute to him many of their own doctrines and their books of pretended prophecy. The real Zoroaster and the real early history of Persia became lost beneath a mass of Greek legends of fantastic character in their mythology. They actually borrowed a lot of Zoroastrian teachings, put them in their own philosophies, corrupted and in turn corrupted the Zoroastrian religion and gave some really bad information. The Greeks were notorious for that. Now, this is a painting, and I'll tell you why I'm showing this painting. This painting is called The School of Athens by the artist Raphael. This is where all the Greek philosophers are. This is Plato, this is Aristotle, Diogenes, Pythagoras, this is Socrates over here. And over here you have Zarathustra. The implication being Zarathustra influenced Greek thought. That is what this is showing. Now, no one knows what Zarathustra looked like. This is an artist's conception, but this is meant to be Zarathustra. This is Raphael, the painter himself. This is Ptolemy, another Greek philosopher. So Zoroaster's influence was in a variety of fields. While the Muslims, the Iranians, were persecuting the Zoroastrians in Iran, the rest of the world was eulogizing Zarathustra and extolling Zarathustra's teachings. Voltaire, the French philosopher, he had read a Zoroastrian text in a Latin translation, and he recognized Zarathustra's teachings as an unspoiled religion. His classic proclamation was "Écraser l'infâme," which means vanquish evil in all its forms, choosing Zarathustra's fundamental dictum of destroying evil in all its forms. Voltaire, in another book called Zadig, Zadig is a character, and this protagonist follows the teachings of Zarathustra, and there are motifs in the book, like the Chinvar Bridge. He's called the Chinvar Bridge. That's the Chinvar Bridge, which is the same implication, the bridge of the separator after death. Herman Melville in Moby Dick, most of you must have read the book. He has a character, Fedallah the Parsi. Now, if you know the story, the captain of the ship Pequod, where the story takes place, is Ahab, and he is an evil force. He's a maniac. Fedallah is the counter-force to that evil, the good, and he was Fedallah the Parsi. And when he prays, the book says, when he prays facing the sun, as Zoroastrians do. In Mozart's libretto, the Magic Flute has Sarastro, the priestly character, and is prominent with Zoroastrian themes, light versus darkness, pursuit of wisdom, and righteousness. In all these other writings, the dominant theme is Zarathustra's premise of good versus evil and humankind's responsibility to vanquish evil. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was drawn to Zoroaster's good principles. Now, make a note of this. These are all Western people. These are all Christian, die-hard Christians. There is not one Zoroastrian over here in these quotes that I'm sharing with you. So Emerson was drawn to Zoroaster's good principle with the idea of original fire. And this is all taking place in the 1800s and 1700s and early 1900s, when the Zoroastrians were facing torment in Iran. The world is recognizing Zarathustra and its teachings. So Emerson says he also thought of Zoroaster the first to teach through allegories. The Gathas are full of figurative language, personifications, metaphors, allegories, similes. Emerson recognized that. And he was drawn to the idea that the religion was aimed at more than the redemption of individuals. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe has written a book called West-East Divan. And there's a chapter in that book called the Parsi Name. And he writes, the Zoroastrian religion is clearly based on the dignity of all elements as manifesting God's existence and power. Hence, the sacred dread to pollute water, the air, the earth. Why do we not pollute water, air, and earth? Because it's a civic duty, it's a civic responsibility. Because we diminish the quality of life of our fellow citizens when we do this. That's why there's this prescription. Such respect for all natural forces that surround man leads to every civic virtue. Attention, cleanliness, application are stimulated and fostered. Very, very Zoroastrian principles. William Edward O'Mara is a professor at some California State University, I think in San Diego somewhere. This quote is from his PhD dissertation, his PhD thesis when he was a student at the University of California, Irvine. And he says, the advent of Zoroastrianism represents a revolution in world religious thought. And its influence can be felt in the most fundamental elements of the world's largest and most pervasive religions, Christianity and Islam. It is, in fact, easily argued that this little-known ancient religion is both the oldest of the prophetic revealed religions and marks the true beginnings of Western civilization. Zoroaster influenced Western civilization without a doubt. A Christian professor, American, saying this. It has been fiendishly difficult for Western thinkers to escape the long shadow of Zarathustra. Zoroastrian influence on the US Constitution. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Xenophon was a Greek historian and a philosopher, and he wrote a book called Cyropedia, which is an account of Cyrus the Great's governance formulated on his Zoroastrian upbringing. Now, America's founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, James Madison, they were avid readers of the Cyropedia. In fact, it is said, and actually this is from a book, this is not again Melia Ravetna talking from his wherever, this is from a book, How the Founding Fathers of America Were Inspired by Cyrus the Great, by Richard Fry. Richard Fry was a professor at Harvard University. And Afshin Zan was an Iranian, a student from Tehran, who was Richard Fry's PhD student. So the America's founding fathers were avid readers of the Cyropedia. It is said that Jefferson had 4 copies, 2 in Latin and 2 in English. And he gave that to his family, his nieces, nephews. Read this book. This is what it is all about. Now, of course, that is not publicized and could not be said openly because America at that time, as it is now, a very Christian country, but more so back in those days. You could not say anything against Christianity or non-Christian. You'd be just killed. So anyway, Benjamin Franklin, he came across the Avesta while he was in London. And he read that and he sent a letter to a friend of his. This is what our country should be. This is what it should be. And this is in their book. This is not something I'm making up. This is in Richard Fry and Afshin Zan's book. Cyrus's Zoroastrian beliefs inspire ideas such as separation of church and state, which is an American constitutional thing, checks and balances on branches of government, free will, as in the right of each individual bound by equal rights of others, the right of religious freedom, and a production economy is the basis of. Now, Zarathustra was very much in favor of agriculture and stability and a steady life, as opposed to a nomadic life. And the American founding fathers felt the same way, that a steady, stable life, a production economy, is what makes a country prosperous and economically sound. Now, there's a guy called Charles Boston. He was called the father of Arizona, and that's not why I'm stating him over here. The reason he's called father of Arizona is that he made Arizona a state, and that's why he's called the father of Arizona. But he went to India sometime in the 1800s, and he met some Zoroastrians over there, and he was just enamored of the faith. And he actually, some say he converted the Zoroastrian religion. And he wrote this was a lecture, the Parsis. The great Zoroaster had promulgated the sublime laws announced to him by the bright shining essence of light, Aura Mazda, for the government of mankind. Now, Charles Boston, when he came back to Arizona, he started building a Zoroastrian temple in Florence, Arizona. Florence is about 60 miles southwest of Phoenix. But he ran out of money. So halfway through the construction of the temple, he ran out of money. And he wrote to Nasir-al-Din Shah for money, and he never got a reply. But even today, that half-built temple stands in Florence, Arizona. Neil McGregor, who is the director of the British Museum, he came to the United States in 2013. And the Cyrus cylinder is in the British Museum. And he brought it to America, and he went through different major cities. And he came to Houston, and I had the opportunity of seeing the Cyrus cylinder. And he says, the ideas and ideals of the Persian Empire are very close to the ideals and ideas of the modern United States. How much influence Zarathustra had is just phenomenal. In 1948, Israel declared independence. Within 5 minutes, the United States recognized an independent Israel, Harry Truman was the president, and he made the call. A few months after Truman left office, he was visiting the Hebrew Theological Seminary in New York City, and he was introduced as the man who helped create the state of Israel. What do you mean help create? Truman snapped. I am Cyrus. I am Cyrus, he declared, a reference to the Persian emperor who liberated the Jews from Babylon in exile. There are many of us who kind of ridicule Western scholarship, and this is something from the Western scholars have really given us the meaning and the understanding of our religion. This is from Edward Kawasi Ililichakanga's words. These are his words. This is in a preface. In a preface to extracts from the narrative of Monsieur Marquet du Perron's travels in India, Edward Kanga maintains that Western scholarship has illumined, has brought to light, to a great extent, the obscurity in which the Zoroastrian lore was shrouded by lapse of ages. These are his words. And he adds, it has been with the study of Zand, as it has been with the study of the inscriptions and architecture of the caves. Philological light has in the former, as magnesium light in the latter, illumined many dark places in the structure of Zand, and in the philosophy and ethics of Zoroaster. For this, we are indebted to European scholars who have been and are the only expounders of the Zend-Avesta. The deep researches of Bernhoff, Wester, these are German and European scholars, Westergaard, Spiegel, and Hogg, have given rise. Hogg was, Martin Hogg was actually a professor at the University of Pune, and he gave the Zoroastrians a lot of information on the religion. They have given rise to a new school among the Parsis, which in the last 15 years has read and interpreted Zand and Palbi on the recognized principles laid down by these scholars. What does Mary Boyce say? Zoroastrianism is the oldest of the creedal religions, and it has probably had more influence on mankind, directly and indirectly, than any other single faith. John Hennels, professor at London University. Perhaps no other religion has influenced so many people in so many continents over so many centuries. These are all, again, Western scholars, Christian people. Samuel Lang was an engineer, an Englishman, and he's written a book, Modern Zoroastrianism. The code of, he says, the code of morality enjoined by the Zoroastrian religion is as pure as its theory is perfect. And he was a very Christian man. Wilhelm Geiger and Friedrich Windishman, Germans, they wrote a book, Xerxes in the Gathas, and in Greek Roman classics in German. And Dastur Dara, Peshat and Sanjana, he translated the German book into English. And they say, we are able to assert that the original form of Zoroastrianism, the philosophical and religious ideas of its founder and of its first professors, can be represented, at least in their general features, upon the basis of the Gatha text. And that such a glimpse into the earliest stages of one of the purest and most sublime religions which have ever existed must be considered as exceedingly instructive. George William Carter has written a book, Zoroastrianism and Judaism, and he says, the Zoroastrian faith is one of the world's great religions. The purity and ideality of Horomazda, the belief in the company of angels, Amisha Spentas, that do his bidding, the expectation of a coming savior, the high value set upon man, the lofty conception of the future life, the final overcoming of evil by good, Trashokareti, are among the elements of strength. The depth of philosophy, the spirituality of many of its views, the clearness and purity of its ethics are scarcely equaled by any creed of ancient times. We all know about Parsi charity. We are in Parsi, thy name is charity. Now we know about all the Parsi charities, the Wadias and the Setnas and the Tatars and all they did for India and for the Parsis in India. But the Parsi charities went out of India to foreign countries. And Alfred Martin, who was associate leader of the Society for Ethical Culture, writes in a book, Great Religious Teachers of the East. As for the generosity of the Parsis, it is unrivaled, extending far beyond the limits of Bombay. It went to Russia at the time of the Crimean War, when Florence Nightingale described the Parsi community as the salt of the Bombay community. It went to France in 1859. In 1859, France was at war with Austria. I'm not sure about the exact history, but there was something to do with the unification of Italy. But anyway, that's not important. France was at war. And so it went to France in 1859, when the terrible inundations necessitated the supplementing of local aid by foreign help. And the Parsis were among the first to respond and among the most liberal of the contributors. It went to the United States at the time of the Civil War, our Sanitary Commission receiving a handsome remembrance from the followers of Zoroaster in India. Sent, they said, because of their sympathy with the suffering soldiers and the cause of freedom and union. And the money went not just to the north, it went to the north and the south. But the north was better organized and better structured. So a lot of money got siphoned to the north, and the south didn't get a whole lot of money. Another point I want to make over here is that all the civilizations, ancient civilizations, the Greek, the Roman, the Egyptian, they all built some good structures and good monuments and things like that. They were all built on slave labor. Even in America, the White House was built on slave labor, but not so with the Zoroastrians. The monuments that the Achaemenids and the Sassanians have left behind, they were all the workers were paid. They were not slaves. It's the only civilization in history that did not use slave labor, something we should be proud of. An American traveling to India said, India without Parsis is like an egg without a yolk. Mahatma Gandhi said, in numbers, the Parsis are beneath contempt. We're very small in number, but in contributions beyond compare, incomparable in contributions. This is my last slide. Cyrus Spangbaum was a professor of religion at Rutgers University, and he's written a book, Zoroastrianism. He's passed away now, Zoroastrianism, a Beleaguered Faith. Now, don't get fooled by the name Cyrus. He was on a Parsi. He was born in Kansas in a very Christian family. And he writes, as the working of a divine providence has oft revealed, the will to move forward creatively and constructively can be strengthened more by preliminary defeat than by easy but minor achievement. The Zoroastrians may have temporized when they met up with niggling problems, but confronted by crises, they have surmounted them. While it would be a mistake to predict the Zoroastrians will either now and always and forever overcome, it is not an exaggeration to insist that they possess the traits essential to doing so if they but have the courage and the will to apply them in battle. They are intelligent and they are educated. All of us over here are, no question about that. They are compassionate and they're altruistic. There is sincerity in their piety and reverence and a stubborn insistence that it is better to be honest and good in this world than to make their way in it by wile and cleverness. They are also immensely sociable. They love sharing their good times and they have style. Long may they live. And with that, I thank you for your attention and I pass the baton on to Faribos.
Thank you, Mariel. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Today we are going to talk about the evolution of Zoroastrianism. For sure it has evolved. We know that in our lifetime, which is a very small period in history, we see upheavals and changes. So for sure in the 3,700 year history, there have been changes. And here we shall try to follow the history with an open mind. We'll start with the Greek grammarian Hermippus, who lived in the 3rd century BCE, and he attributed 20,000 verses to Zarathustra and 2 million verses to the Magi's. Now, with these, the Persian culture was shaped and the Persian Empire thrived and ruled benevolently over its varied subjects. Multiculture and multi-religion were the concept accepted features of the empire. The Bible and the Torah vouch for it. The Persepolis clay tablets in Chicago, the bas reliefs at Persepolis, and the cylinder of human right confirm it. The teachings of Zarathustra were called Mazdiyasti, reverence to wisdom. It recommended the use of all the senses with wisdom. The using of all senses with wisdom when making a decision has been satirized by Herodotus, when he says, important decisions were made by the Persians both when sober and drunk. And if the outcome was similar, the decision held. If not, the Persians set it aside. The Greeks saw the Persian as a rival culture. Now, what was the Greek culture. The Greek culture required the use of only one sense, the sense of hearing. You believe what you hear, no questions asked. Otherwise, you will be accused of blasphemy. So that's the difference. The Persians had to use all the senses, and that too with wisdom. Here you had to only hear what somebody is telling you, believe in it, or you'll be accused of blasphemy. Then you use myth, logic, philosophy to justify what you already believe. As a child, the operating system of the mind is set by fairy tales. Pain is rewarded by tooth fairies. Happiness is transported by reindeers. The Greeks had a god for every element in nature. They had 3,142 gods and goddesses. Alexander came to destroy the Persian culture, for his tutor Aristotle had said, if you destroy the Persians, you'll destroy one of the pillars of civilization and we will rule the world. How true. Today, the Greek culture really rules the world. Aristotle believed that Greeks were a ruling class and the rest of the world were barbarians who needed to be ruled over. This is in his book, The Politician. The first act of Alexander after his victory was to refurbish the disused temples and reintroduce the ancient religions, including Mithraism. Remember, when Cyrus conquered Babylonia, he bowed to Marduk the king, the god, Marduk the goddess. And he did not destroy any temples like was the practice. But with giving them wisdom, the people stopped going to temples. And these temples were not destroyed, but were staying in, depleted because of disuse. And Alexander refurbished this to go, for the people to go back to temples and go against Zoroastrianism. The next step Alexander took was to send 30,000 Persian youth to Rome, train them in Roman culture and send them back among the Persians. His efforts were not in vain. The Persian culture was diluted and engrossed with Greek culture. Then there was a vacuum of 500 years and the Sassanians came to power. They managed to collect some of the scattered knowledge. They assigned Mubed Tansar, Adurbad Merespan, Kartir to edit and compile them. What they had managed to collect, they reconstructed the Zoroastrianism, which became the state religion of the Sassanians. The culture of believing what you hear is evident in the Sassanian era edition. Also, Roman Christianity had its influence on the reconstruction and is visible in Mashia va Mashiane, which was written during that period. We didn't have Adam and Eve. They created Mashia va Mashiane to match the Roman Christianity stories. During the 400 years of Sassanian rule, although Zoroastrianism was the state religion, prophets like Mani and Mazdak had ventured to introduce their thoughts. Zoroastrianism and dualism, in which time gives birth to Urmaz and Ahriman, played an important role in the development of that period. At the same time, science and all the arts flourished and academies were established. The famous Academy of Gondeshapur was one of the 3 Sassanian centers of education. It offered education and training in medicine, philosophy, theology, and science. According to the Cambridge History of Iran, it was the most important medical center of the ancient world during the 6th and 7th centuries. Scholars and seekers of knowledge from all over the world assemble here to study and exchange ideas. In what has remained of the Yash, we see science sandwiched among prayers. For example, the Maya says that the best time to sow a seed in spring is with the appearance of the crescent of the moon. Farwardin Yas talks about the circulatory system and the function of the blood. Mariash pinpoints the location of the natural meridian of the earth from where the sun shines over the entire hemisphere. Then came Islam. The Islamic invasion in the 7th century. In the centuries that followed the invasion, Zoroastrians and Zoroastrianism were steadily wiped out in a genocide that has been forgotten because there were not many left to tell the story. When the Arabs came upon libraries, they asked Omar, the Khalifa, if they should distribute the books as booties of war. Omar replied, if what is in those books are good, Allah has given us better than them in the Quran. And if they are bad, we don't want them. So in either case, burn them or dump them in the river. This act was repeated throughout Islamic history. Nalanda, a center of learning in India, burned for 3 months due to the large number of manuscripts. This is what historians have written. And it was set on fire by Bakhtiyar Khilji, a Turk invader of northern India. The surviving Mubaits salvaged what was memorized with the help of some surviving manuscript, and Zoroastrianism was once again reconstructed, this time to prove to the Islamic rulers that the Zoroastrians, like the Jews, were people of the book. Because people of the book were subdued by imposing jizya on them, but others were simply killed if they didn't convert. The Pahlavi scriptures of that period are living evidence of this effort. This is vouched by no other than Professor Martin Haig. He says, in several Mohammedan writings, especially in vernacular Persian dictionaries, we find Zoroaster, or as he is there called Zardusht, identifies with Abraham, the patriarch. The Magi's are said to have called their religion Kishe Ibrahimi, that is the creed of Abraham, who they consider as their prophet and the reformer of their religion. They traced their religious book to Abraham, who was believed to have bought them from heaven. This was altogether untrue, but the Magi's or Parsi priests invented it to escape the persecution of the Mohammedans and that they might be tolerated to a certain extent. For only these creeds were tolerated by the Mohammedans, the followers of which were able to convince them of the possession of a sacred book connected in any way with the Jewish religion, whose prophets had been acknowledged by Muhammad. This is from Martin Haig's book, page 16, written in 1878. Now in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, as Maria also pointed out, Western scholars became interested in Zoroastrianism. They did not get any assistance from the followers of the religion, for they had lost all knowledge of Avesta, and only a few Mubaits understood the Pahlavi language. The only option open to them was to refer to some ancient writings that had connection with the Persians. And they were the Greeks, the Romans, the Armenians, and the Mohammedans. That is the later Iranians who wrote in Arabic. With these as the conceptual guide and Sanskrit as the linguistic guide, Western scholars deciphered the Avesta language. formulated the concepts and established the teachings of Zarathustra. The work of these Western scholars is what has shaped the Zoroastrian religion as is followed today in the 21st century. Remember that when the scholars started the work in India, they could not get any help from the Parsi priest because they did not have knowledge of Avesta. Very few had knowledge of Pahlavi. So basically they started from scratch, taking help of ancient books written by unfriendly to the Zoroastrians, like the Greeks, Romans, Mohammedans, and Armenians. Today, the followers swear by this translation made by the Western scholars and are not ready to see the obvious flaws in them. Although it has to be acknowledged that without the collective work of these Western scholars, Zoroastrianism would have been lost forever. Because at that time, if you remember, John Wilson, who's Wilson College in Bombay, he was converting Parsis right and left by arguing with them, and them not knowing anything about the religion. He was able to convert a lot of people. And finally, this was taken to the courts in the British court. And there he was stopped from doing this. The Parsis won against Wilson. Otherwise, he was just converting people because they didn't know anything. So Western scholars saved Zoroastrianism from getting lost. What the Greeks have conveyed has been incorporated by these scholars through the translation of the Avesta. Because they didn't have any input from the Zoroastrians, they went to the Greeks, and what the Greeks had written, they were trying to find it in the Avesta writings. They took help of Sanskrit and the conceptual help from these writings. And they inserted all that into the translation under the guise of grammar and rhyme and rhythm. The personification of Ahriman, Ahura Mazda, Ameshasapantas, and Yazatas has all been derived by translators from the Greek. Although Herodotus very clearly states that the god of the Persian is not anthropomorphic like that of the Greeks. But because the Greeks had 3,000 plus gods, they thought that all of these are deities and gods, and they personified all of them. Now I quote what Martin Haig has said. He says, Aristotle stated that in the doctrine of the Magi, there are two powers opposed to each other. One representing the good god called Zeus or Ormasdis, and the other representing the devil whose name was Hades and Ahrimanus. Of this chief doctrine of the Magi, Theopompus has given a further illustration. Plutarch and Diogenes reported that Ormasdis ruled for 3,000 years alone. Now, this story you must have heard many times. This is actually written by Plutarch and Diogenes. That Urmas, or as they call Ormasdis, ruled for 3,000 years alone, and Ahrimanos for 3,000 more. After this period of 6,000 years had elapsed, they began to wage war against each other, one attempting to destroy the other. But finally, he says, Ahrimanos is to perish. Mankind is to enjoy a blessed state of life. Men will neither be any more in need of food, nor will they cast shadows. The dead are to rise again. Man will be immortal, and everything is to exist in consequence of their prayers. So this is what the Greek have written about Zoroastrianism. Now you decide for yourself if this theory is made up by the Greeks or if it is in existence in Avesta. To me, it sounds like a Greek myth. Aristotle's suggestion of dualism was inserted in the Gathas, especially in Ha 30.2, where although the word two does not exist, they have translated the Sanskrit word choice as two parts and justified it by way of imagined grammar. Some have even added the word good and evil, although it does not exist in the Avesta text of the verse. In 30.2, the word good and evil is not there, but many translators have specified the two parts as good and evil. In reality, Zarathustra in 30.2 talks of the innumerable choices, professions basically, available to humans to choose from and achieve perfection in them and progress towards wholeness, Hurvatata, by becoming an accomplished astronomer, cook, doctor, engineer, farmer, you name it, and leaving behind a legacy for which one would be remembered for generation. That means to be amordad, immortal. Immortality is not in body, immortality is in name. And 30.2 is telling you how to achieve that. During the Sassanian era, the competition from Christianity caused the establishment of doctrines compatible with Christianity. For example, the story of Adam and Eve became Mashia and Mashiane. Although Mashiane was created as an equal, unlike Eve. Remember, Eve was made from the rib of Adam. I think someone has got their mic on. Please unmute yourself. So Eve was taken from the rib of Adam and was not equal to equal, but Mashiane was equal because they were made from one seed. So Zoroastrianism was inserted in it, and the equality of men and women was inserted in it, but they had to produce something to be compatible with the Christian religion, and they did that. During the Islamic era, to establish Zoroastrianism, to establish that Zoroastrians were people of the book and compatible with Islam, Pahlavi books like Dinkar, Dastan-e-Dini, etc. were written to that effect. Even Manek-i Limji Hataria, when meeting the Shah to request the abolition of the Jizya tax, says that Zoroastrianism, in essence, is the same as Islam, and we know it is not. But he had to say it. He was there to request the king to abolish the Jizya, and it was an act which would go against the Quran, and he couldn't argue that we are different. He had to say that, oh, it is the same religion. Anyways, today we are left with only 238 verses from Zarathustra, not the 20,000 that the Greeks have reported. For sure, in the 77 years, Zarathustra had produced more than that. These verses were camouflaged by the last compiler of the Avesta. For whatever reason, the Avesta that we have in hand today, the Gathas have been camouflaged by breaking them up into 5 parts and leaving some has in the middle, which are not the Gathas, and they're connected by numerology. As I've said before, 28 is 2 plus 8, 10, 10 is 1 plus 0, 1. And similarly, 34 is 3 plus 4, 7. And then we go to 43. That's also 7. So that two are connected. These in the middle from 34 to, from in the middle, that portion is not Gathas. We know about that. But if these 238 verses are properly understood in their own light, it is enough to change the paradigm and create a benevolent society and a better world. And we should endeavor to look at the Gathas without influence from the Greeks, without influence from Christianity, and without influence from Islam. Or whatever we have done in this period, as you saw, and it is vouched by various writers, if we can undo that, we will get the pure translation. We are lucky to have the Gathas word by word as it was, because its language today is recognized as being different from the rest of the Avesta, that it being very old. And that is how they found it. So as far as the Avesta version of the Gathas is concerned, we can be sure it is 99.99% word by word. A little change may have occurred because of pronunciations, but otherwise it's good. So we should try to get a translation which is purified from the influence of foreign cultures. And that's the end of today's talk. Thank you very much for listening. And let's go to question and answers if there are any.
There are quite a few. There are quite a few. So let's start, and we can have a discussion if anyone wants. So Delphina says the slides are not changing. I hope you could see the slides. That'd be sad if you could not see the slides. Mark will come to your question, to your hand in a minute. Let's just finish with this. So Delphina wants to know what were some of the specific Zoroastrian practices that Shah Rukh challenged. He was opposed to the Dakma practice, for example. And there were a couple of reasons. For one, he thought that was unhygienic. It was not a Zoroastrian practice. It was not in the Gathas. And that I mentioned that in the reading material that I sent out. But more important than that, he was opposed to it because what was happening was that Tehran University had a medical school built at the time. And the students from that medical school were desecrating the Dakmas, they're going into the Dakmas and stealing the bodies for their studies. That is not the right thing to do. And so and actually that's one of the reasons why in Iran, the practice of exposing the corpse to vultures and all that is discontinued. What was the status of the jizya tax on Zoroastrians during the Pahlavi and post-revolution? Good question. Actually, when Maniji Lamji Hataria came to Iran, initially he was able to get the Shah to reduce the tax. But eventually, later on, he actually got the tax abolished. So by the time the Pahlavis came to power, the jizya tax did not exist. Delphina has another question. Sadeh and Char-Shambe Suri as examples are events celebrated outside in the public. Made this for Faraburs. How were these celebrated post-revolution then? Since nowadays we see these celebrations in public. When did the transition between non-celebrating our celebrations in front of the Muslims?
The Char-Shambe Suri is not a Zoroastrian celebration. We did not jump over the fire and curse fire with our sickness. This is a Muslim invention. It's an Iranian invention, I would say, not a Muslim invention. It's an Iranian invention. They just wanted to celebrate it. We used to carry fire to the top of the mountain, and the Kurds still do that. We used to carry the fire to the top of the mountain and welcome the new year. And that was done right at the time of when the new year would happen, the morning of the new year. Sadeh was celebrated in the open. Unfortunately, about 5-6 years ago, round about that, the government stopped it because a lot of Muslims were participating. There were more Muslims than Zoroastrians, and it had become a tourist attraction. Tourist guides used to bring all their people to watch it. And there was a central location in Tehran, in Yaz, and in Kerman that would perform the Sadeh. So the government came and said that these are celebrations that you have to do privately. You have to do it in your own village. You can't collect at one place. And after that, they send in their revolutionary guards to control, to see in every village only the Zoroastrians were attending it and not Muslims. So that's how it's celebrated.
Okay, then Delphina says there is a Zoroaster temple in the Grand Canyon South Rim. That is correct. But it is not a temple, actually. It's not a physical structure. It's a point. It's just a mountain peak, a canyon peak that is named Zoroaster Temple. As there are Vishnu temple and other gods, and I think there's Moses temple, I think, something like that. So it's not a temple in the literal sense. It's a mountain peak, or canyon peak rather, that is called Zoroaster Temple. You're right. Maruk Mutafaram says, thank you, Maria, really inspirational. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Delphina then has a question. Can one say that Mithraism, Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrianism are sects within the Zoroastrian religion, each having its own prophets? No. Mithraism and Zoroastrianism are heresies. They are nothing to do with the Zoroastrian religion. Absolutely nothing. They were introduced by kind of priests, excuse me, back in the Sassanian days, and nothing to do with the religion. Zoroastrian religion is exclusively the Zoroastrian religion. No Mithraism, no Zoroastrianism, no Mazdakism, nothing of the sort.
Thank you.
Sure. Now, Maruk, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Fariborz, that was very, very good too. I think it gave me a little bit of an understanding as you walked through the entire sequence, how our religion, I'm just totally blown away that in spite of everything, we still stand here today as Zoroastrians. So that says something about what we believe. The question I have is more of a historical one, because we talk about Zoroastrianism, the birth of Zoroaster around 3,000, 3,500 years ago. And you talked about the Romans, you talked about the Greeks. You have not talked about the Egyptian civilization that was there around 3,100, around that same time. The reason I'm asking is because I see the Ashofar that we wear. That symbol was also there during the Egyptian civilization. So my first question is there a similarity? Is that something that we shared? And the reason why I'm asking you also is because of the Silk Route, right? There was a lot of sharing of ideas, exchange of wisdom along the Silk Route. And my understanding is our religion did prosper during that time too. So the question is, can you shine some light on that?
Yeah. See, Fravahar came to being during the Achaemenian period, and you see that in Persepolis. Every king has a Fravahar on top of his head, and they're each different. If you see the one which is on the top of head of Darius, it has 36 feathers on each side, so 72, the famous 72 that we have. I counted it, you can count it too, the one on top of Darius' head. The others are different. They have 21, 16, and 16 in different sizes, so it becomes 16, 16, but they are there. So this Fravahar that is shown by in the Achaemenian period was a symbol like the crown of the king. The crown of the king was different. So was the Fravahar of each king, depicted differently. If it was a symbol, it would have to be all the same. You cannot have different symbols. If it was a religious symbol, it was for the religion and it has to be the same. But it is different. You can go and there are a lot of pictures of Persepolis. You can Google them, enlarge them and count the feathers, see the difference and all that. What I feel on the studies that I've done, I've seen that just like when we conquered Babylonia, Cyrus bowed to Marduk, did not destroy the temples, etc., which I've talked about before. At that time, the Assyrians had a god. And if you Google Assyrian god or Shur, you'll see that he is a Fravahar with a bow and arrow in hand. He's a god with a bow and arrow, exact Fravahar. Now, we did not want to destroy that either. And this was in every home. So how would you change it? You made it a symbol of the king. We gave meaning to it. You made it a symbol of the king. And that became famous. That became everywhere. And that bow and arrow fell off. And today you have more Fravahar than you have the Ashur god. So Egypt had a similar winged feature, and maybe the Assyrians took it, but we were more connected to the Assyrians. We had conquered them and we had to get rid of it. So we got rid of it in this fashion without destroying their gods. We have never destroyed anybody's religion. We have never destroyed anybody's symbol, but we have overwhelmed it with with wisdom. And that is how the Babylonians didn't go to temple anymore. And Herodotus says that in Persia, nobody went to temples. And again, Plutarch says that the first act of Alexander was to refurbish the disused temples of Babylonia. So that shows that we didn't destroy them, but we gave them wisdom enough to tell them that God does not live in a temple. It is the priest that lives over there. You are just enriching the priest. Stop it. So that's what I think the Fravahar is.
If I may add, the Fravahar is not a original Zoroastrian symbol. It was, as Farbuz rightly said, it's borrowed from the Syrians and somehow maybe even from the Egyptians, because they had the symbol, which was a little different than what we have today and what we use as a Zoroastrian emblem. And it was really started by, as Farbuz said in many times, by Darius I, Darius the Great. He was the one, that's why we see on Naqsh Rustam, you see the Fravahar symbol appended there. Okay, let's see. So Delphina has another question. How and when did the Bundaishan come to being? Has the story of Masha and Mashai have anything to do with it? Bundaishan, Farbuz, you want to take this, or I can take it?
Bundaish was written during the Sassanian period and then rewritten during the Islamic period. A little bit more of Islamization so that we become people of the book. And Mashan Mashane, if you go to Gathas 44, which is about creation, and you do a word-by-word translation, not the talk between asking question of Aura Mazda, because it's not a question that Zartush is asking. He's saying, since you ask, I will truly tell you. He's not asking God to tell him truly. Does God lie that you want to tell him, oh, Aura Mazda, tell me truly? No. It is Zartush saying, since you're asking me this, I'll tell you truly. And it's a story of creation. And Zartush very clearly says over there, he uses the word kasna, means nobody. He says, who created this and that and all that? And he says, the answer is nobody. But if you read Tarapurwala's book, he says that Baltimore has said that don't translate kasna, forget kasna. And others have said kasna is what being. But kasna, even today we use, the Kurds use it, we in Dari language use it. Kas is somebody and Na means nobody. Kas means somebody, Na means no, so nobody. So it's the story of creation. Now, we know that creation is evolutionary according to what is in 44:18 properly translated. But because Christianity had Adam and Eve and we didn't have it, we created it as Mashiach and Mashiane, but we put all Zoroastrian features in it. Like we made sure that they were born of one seed, not from the rib of Adam, and things of that sort. And this story was created, I think, during the Sassanian times and later on rewritten, because the oldest version of any manuscript that we have is from 1323, and that happens to be the Vandidad. The other books that we have are from later manuscripts. Not that they were written in that, they must have copied it from a previous one, like even the Vandidad that was we have in hand, which is of 1323, was copied from one which was from 1185. But anyways, it's not, we don't have a single original copy of any book from the Sassanian period. So we can't say 100% that what has happened between the Sassanian and what we have in hand.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead.
The question was that the Vandidad, and you mentioned last time that the Din card had section, was really the Vandidad rewritten in a way, if I understood you correctly.
Was written down.
By both?
It was written down in 1323,
Yeah,
the copy
so-
that we have.
So the Din card is the same as the Vandidad.
No, the Din
No.
card was produced in the Islamic period. The Astane Dinak and Din card were written by Mubed Farabang, Odorbad. Originally, it was written by him, and that was in the Islamic era.
And what was the connection between the Din card and the Vandidad?
Not
There is no connection.
No
There is no connection. Vandidad was written, was composed, compiled in the Sassanian era. It is again not a Zoroastrian book. In fact, if you read Dasturudhara's book, his autobiography, he says the Vandidad is a waste of time. It has no validity. He's very categorical in that, and I can certainly read that passage to you or send it to you if you're interested. It was a book of laws of purity. It talks about what is a sin, and if someone commits a sin, how many lashes to give that person, 500, 1,000, 10,000, as the case may be, depending on the offense committed. It's got how to bury your hair and fingernail clippings, that kind of stuff. That has nothing to do with those teachings. And
no, it is, Maria, it is like what we find in the municipal laws today. If you want to build a building, they'll tell you how your toilet should be, how your restaurant should be, how many sinks you have to have, how do you wash your utensils, first in water, then in water, all those things.
Yeah.
This is also something like that. It has nothing to do with religion. It has more to do with the administration of the society in that period.
Correct.
So that was in the Sassanian, and then the Din card was in the
Islamic period.
So now there was some mention that the Gathas, certain sections of the Gathas are sort of enveloped in our prayers, like the Yas and the Nyas and all that, right? So I have read somewhere where the Yas and the Nyas were actually pre-Zoroastrian, and then now I'm hearing that they were actually revived then in the Muslim era with the pieces of Gathas mixed in with them. Is that the whole idea?
I'm glad you asked that question, because this kind of, I want to actually go back to what Maruk Mutafaram had asked last week. She mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing her, Maruk, correct me if I'm wrong, but what she said basically was that the Gathas are our basic fundamental teachings of our prophet, of Zarathustra. And we don't have any Gothic verses in the Kordevasta, our daily prayers, like the Nyashes, the Yas, anything else. The only passage from the Gathas is in the Kemna Mazda. It's 46.7. And only a portion of that is in the Kemna Mazda prayer. Everything else is passed in from the Vandidad. No other prayer. And I actually, there was a gentleman, you may have heard of Beramgor Temuras Anklasaria. He was a scholar. And he gave a lecture in 1906 in Bombay on the explanation of the Kordevasta. What are the origins of the Kordevasta prayers that we have? All the Satayashes, all the Nyashes, all the Yast, and etc. And nowhere, except for the Kemna Mazda portion, nowhere is the Gatha, and that goes back to what Maruk was asking last week. It was a very good question and a very good observation that Maruk made. And so you don't have, there are passages from the Yasna, non-Gothic Yasna passages in the Kordevasta, in the Nyashes and the Satayashes and so on and so forth. So this was all put together in the Sassanian era by the Magi. Now the Magi history is another history which we haven't really had a chance to discuss. It's a totally different subject and a very interesting subject, in fact, how the Zoroastrian religion metamorphosed, how it changed, and who caused the changes, why were the changes caused. So Zarathustra never had any Nyash, he didn't have any Yas. In fact, he was opposed to the Yas. In the Gatha, you find only 3 Yazads mentioned: Sarosha, Ashi, and Atar. Sarosha is like Sarosha Yazad, what is called Sarosha Yazad. He's not really a Yazad. Sarosha is a manifestation or an attribute of Havra Mazda for obedience. Obedience to the laws of Havra Mazda. That is what Sarosha is about. Asha is about recompense for good deeds that you do. And Atar is fire being the symbolic and symbol of the Zoroastrian faith, being light and truth and all that. It's all figurative. So there are only 3 Yazatas mentioned in the Gathas. Zarathustra did away with all that. And in fact, that's what the Allah says in History of Zoroastrianism. The elimination was not accidental. It was deliberate. Zarathustra did not believe in a multi-deity religion. He said that there's only one deity, one power, one force that we must venerate, Havra Mazda. All the others came back again later. Now, all these Yazatas, all the Homas and the Hom Yazad and Mer Yazad, Mithra and all that were pre-Zarathustra. Zarathustra eliminated them. When he passed away, and when the Magi, Cyrus the Great, conquered Media and Assyria and all that, and made it part of the Achaemenid Empire, the Magi came into the religion and they reintroduced all that Zarathustra had rejected. And that's why we have all those today. We have the Mer Yazad and the Sarak Yazad and the Adibes Yast and this, that, and so on and so forth.
So basically, the only prayers that really Zarathustra gave us were the Gathas.
Yes. And actually, my interpretation of that is that the Gathas are not really prayers in a sense. Because what do you mean by prayer? We pray when we want something, or we are thankful for some boon received, or we we basically saying, thank you, God, for giving me what you have, or give me good health, give me money, give me health for my children, so on and so forth. The Gathas are rules, they are directives, they are fixed laws of nature. So they're not prayers in the classical sense. Yeah, we do pray, we have Gatha days, we have 5 Gatha days, and we sit and pray the Gathas. And that's okay, nothing wrong with that, I'm not knocking it. But they're not really prayers in the literal sense. They are rules, they are directions. Follow these rules of the Gathas. And Zarathustra did not make one set of rules for liberals, one for the conservatives. He said, no, there's only one set of rule. Take it or leave it. If you don't like it, if you follow my rules, you'll be happy. If not, you will bear the consequences. And that's very clear in, somebody correct me, 30.2, 30.4, somewhere in that, he says that very clearly. Either follow the rules or don't follow the rules. If you follow, you'll be happy, you'll be successful. If you don't, you'll bear the consequences.
Okay, so what are we supposed to pray then?
Sorry?
What are we supposed to pray then? If we have no prayers, if the Yas and the Nyas, I mean, Atash Nyas has Uzroi, Usmoy Uzareshwa Ahura. That's I think part in the Gatha. I've read that somewhere in the Gatha as well. So
There may,
So
there may be a line here or there, maybe there is a line borrowed in some yas here and there. But basically all the yas and the nyashis, they don't have any Gothic verses. There may be a line or a sentence here and there, maybe. It's possible. Because you got to remember, keep this in mind. The Magi, when they introduced all this, they looked at the Gathas. They looked at the Gathas and they used the Gathas as a benchmark for their ideology. And they put some of the words in the
I would like
with the
to
prayers.
Maria, add something over here.
Go ahead.
That we have a lot of Arabic in our prayers, which shows that it was composed later on. Like we say, Munajat. Munajat is an Arabic word. Then
Imam.
in our prayers, in our prayers, we say Alam. The word Alam. Just let me bring that prayer. It says. Khudawand alam ra hame anjuman ra. In Tandurusti we pray, right? Khudawand alam. Alam is a Arabic word. It's not a Persian word. It's not a Avesta word. So these have been created later on. And especially if you read Tandurusti prayer, if you read the Persian priest, we can understand every word of it because it's Pahlavi and close to Persian. And a lot of Arabic in it.
So what should we pray on a daily basis then?
Whatever you like.
Whatever you like. I mean, there's nothing wrong with praying the yas for the end. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But it's not really from Zarathustra.
Okay.
So pray. I can pray in English. I say, God, please help me. Okay, I need good health. Okay, God, please help me. Or Khudaji mane madad karo, if I say in Gujarati. Or so that's prayer. Prayer is appealing to a higher power for some help or thanking a higher power for the help received or the boons received. So it can be in any language. It's prayer.
Now I'll tell you something over here. When we pray in front of the fire, and especially when we pray in Avesta language, which we don't understand what we are praying, it's very helpful in the sense the flickering of the fire and the prayer that you're praying without knowing the meaning helps bring your mind, calms your mind and brings it to an alpha stage. Now go and Google alpha stage of the mind. You'll realize that when you're in the alpha stage, it's the most productive period of your brain. You can solve any question you have when you're in the alpha stage. You can invent things. You can do superb things in the alpha stage. And you don't stay in the alpha stage for too long. By standing in front of the fire, praying in a language you don't understand, you're calming your mind down, a meditational stage, and you are in the alpha stage and the most productive.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, there is a psychological benefit to prayer. As far as there's a psychological benefit, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's important. In fact, I say prayer is something that we must engage in. But if you sit and pray the entire Marias and you think you've reached God, you're kidding yourself.
See, in Marias, we have a very important information which nobody has tried to expound on that. In Marias, we are told that there is a place and it gives you the correct address, the mountains and the rivers and everything. And if you go and study those mountains and find where it is, it's on 63 degrees longitude, which passes through Afghanistan on the border of Iran. And over there, when the sun is at the midday position, there is sunshine on the entire hemisphere from Australia and Japan to Africa and Europe. So Marias, which is about Mitra, about the sun. And what does it say? From that point, Mitra stretches the arms and holds the two corners of the landmass. And the two landmasses, two corners are Australia, Japan, and Africa, Europe. And you can go and have a look at it on timeanddate.com. There are maps of when the sun is at different positions. And when it is 12 o'clock noon in Afghanistan, you'll see there is sunshine over the entire hemisphere. That is what Marias is telling us.
Okay, Maruk has a question. She's raised her hand. Maruk?
I lost my train of thought while I was listening to Faribor's. Anyway, I think it is something to do with the prayers, to what Maruk was talking about. So what do we pray? I think that's for you to decide, right? That's what Zarathustra has told us, right? To discern, to figure out what would be best for you. I think what we talk about also, that is in my humble opinion, is a very transactional relationship with God when we pray. If we want something, or I remember praying to God, if I want to pass my exams and get whatever, we prayed, right? And that kind of is embedded in our psyche. But when I think about prayer, it doesn't have to be words. It can just be quiet in your mind, meditation, or just being in sync with everything around you. And I don't know, it's difficult because when we talk to our children, what do we teach them? Hashem Bahu, Atawaryo, and tell them to live that prayer rather than just saying that prayer. What does it mean, and how do you incorporate into your daily living? To me, that's more important than just sitting down and saying prayers. I just thought I'd make a comment.
If you think,
about
yeah,
that.
you know, if you think of our basic prayers, just the Kemina Mazda and even the Oramas of the Kasti prayer, we are not asking for anything. We are actually saying what we will do. We will fight evil. Oramas Dukharai, Hariman, Avarshan, Duruzasan, Jasta Kastibat, Hareman, Devan, Darujan, Jaduan, Darvandan, Kikan, Karafan, Sassan. These are all evil forces. Jaduan, someone who does Jadu. Darvandan, one who is a Darvan. Kikan is the kicks and corrupts of the Gatha. Dushman of Freyan, enemies. We will fight those. It is how we will act. That's what we are praying. In the Kemina Masa prayer, the same thing. I will fight evil. It is all about action. A prayer is action, not just uttering words.
And just to add, these words that you just mentioned and all the prayers, that the Kashti prayer especially, they are mostly 90% Pahlavi words.
They're Pazan. Yeah. Pahlavi is a commentary on Pazan. Yeah.
So who produced our Kasti prayers then? Who produced that? I know our Kasti was pre-Zarathustra.
Correct.
So who produced then the Kasti prayers and the alats that went with it?
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know that very well.
But I'll say this, if our Kasti is supposed to be made out of 72 threads because of the 72 parts of the Avesta, Zarathustra was still writing the Gathas. So
there was no Yasna at the time. There was no Yasna at the time.
There was none of these at the time. So he did not have a 72 thread Kashti. And the Kurds believe that the shawl that they wear around their waist and tie 3 knots to it, the Kurds, that's worn by Zarathustra in all his pictures. Mitra is wearing it on the bas relief. And they say that is the Kashti. It's not the 72 thread that we wear. It is the shawl that the Kurds wear and Zarathustra is wearing. And the 72 did not exist at the time of Zarathustra. So to say that he was wearing a Kashti, it's too much.
Now, actually, we believe, many Parsis, Zoroastrians believe that the Kashti was introduced by Jamshed, the Peshadarian mythical king, Jamshed Pacha. But if you look at the Homeyas, in the Homeyas, it says it was the Yazata Home who went on the highest mountains of Iran, in Alborz mountains, and he prayed. And because of his devotion to God, he was given the Kashti, the thread. Now, that actually, I don't think, no one actually gave him a Kashti or thread. It was more created as a symbolism to connect ourselves, humans, with a higher power. I think that was a relationship. So who made the real Kashti? A mythical king like Jamshed, or was it mythical Homa? God only knows.
But see the practical use of it. If you tie the Kashti, every morning you repeat yourself. Every morning you commit yourself to it. If you don't do it even 5 times, you at least do it once. you're committing to something, you're reminding yourself of something, and it starts your day with that thought of doing good. Of
You promise
all
to
that.
do something. Exactly. You promise
So,
to do something. Yeah.
It's
correct.
more important what it helps you than who created it, who
Correct.
and what you pray with it. It's the idea that you start the day with. That's very important. And if you can pray 5 times a day, it's even better. But at least morning, that starts your day with that action.
Cyrus has a question. It seems reasonable that empires that were close to each other from a local perspective would borrow aspects from each other and incorporate it into the culture. Yeah, that's a reasonable argument, no question about it. Delphina then goes on to say, then why is the order of the Amesha different in the creation story in Mundaishan and the Gathas? The Amesha are attributes of Hauramazda. The wisdom, devotion, righteousness, these are attributes, and these attributes we have to incorporate in ourselves. Zarathustra had these attributes, and these are attributes of Hauramazda that we are expected to make part of our own life. So that's what
I would say this differently, a little bit differently, and that is that Amsha Spandans are not deities. They are not something which is there controlling you. For me, it is a step-by-step progress towards wholeness. And it doesn't start with Urmas. We have followed other religions because you have to say the name of God first. You start everything with the name of God. So we say Urmas. Urmas is the last step. It is what you will come to. So you start with Vahumana, the good mind. So you will use your good mind to learn from Asha Vahishta. Asha is not just Asha, it's Asha Vahishta, the best in Asha. Asha is the universe, the nature. And you'll use your Vahumana, your good mind, to learn from Asha Vahishta, the best that is in Asha. You get your medicines from there, you get your science from nature, you get everything from nature. You learn from the ant how to pick up a weight. They're studying it now. Zarathustra was telling us, do it 3,000 years ago, said everything is in nature, use your good mind, learn the good things. You can learn the bad things also from it, but don't. You can learn to make an atom bomb, don't do it. Just learn the atom part of it and create power. So use your good mind, learn from Asha. When you learn from Asha, what do? Don't keep it in the library. Make good rules, make good products. So that is Hashatraveryu. Hash means good. Hashatraveryu. Make good rules. When you make good rules, that society following that rule becomes a society which is Isfan, which is good, which is righteous. And that is the next Amshaspandan. And in a righteous society, what happens? Everything is according to nature, everything is going right. So you become Khordad, you become Hurvatata, you become perfect, you become whole. And in such a society where everybody is moving towards wholeness, what happens?
Ormas.
world becomes better.
No.
Frashakarati.
You leave behind a legacy.
Yeah. You go towards
behind
immortality.
a legacy.
Yeah.
You leave behind a legacy for which you will be remembered for generations. And that's Amerta. So these are steps, and it's in the Gathas. Unfortunately, it has been wrongly translated. It's in 28.3. So, and what happens then when you get to the stage of Khordad and you do something, you may do something which is Amerta, or you may not, but you are at a stage where you can come to yourself. Khud a. You say Khuda. Khud, self, come to yourself. You come to yourself and you see God within yourself. So Urmas or Auramazda, it's at the end. It is something that you get to it. It is not something that is sitting in the front and you don't put your leg on his head and start with Vahumana. you reach Urmaz in the end. So Urmaz is the 7th step, and that is the final step. And it is a spiritual part of the religion where you see God within yourself.
Freddy
And
has a comment.
I will add another very touchy point, the meaning of Ahura Mazda. Unfortunately, Ahura is not Lord, and Mazda, Ahura Mazda is not the meaning that has been given. Ahura is creation. In the Gathas, if you translate Ahura as creation, everything falls into line. If you say Lord, it becomes God. And then you have 353 times God in the 200 verses. But if you say creation, it gives you meaning. You don't have to manipulate anything. And Ahura Mazda means creation, and Mazda means wisdom. So what is God? God is a creation of your wisdom. Why is it that every religion has a different meaning for God? Why is it that every God is giving a different direction? How stupid is this God that he didn't create one religion? And why all this fight? Because different prophet came and gave you different ideas about God. So Zarathustra from the beginning said that God is a creation of your wisdom. You create your own God and live with it. Don't impose it on others.
Wisdom in nature, basically, here.
That is Mazda Ahura. When you say Mazda
Yeah.
Ahura, is the wisdom in creation or in nature. The wisdom that is the law of gravity is the wisdom that is in nature.
Correct. Okay, Freddy has a comment. Dinkard has or had 9 volumes and mentions the contents of the 21 Nusks, of which the 19th is related to the Vandidad. That's correct, which is the only surviving Nusk in Palvi. Yes, the first 2 Nusks are lost to history. We don't have them. And the third, the first half is missing. We only have the second half of the third Nusk. Hoshang, could you please tell us a little about Dakiki, whose work was continued by Firdausi in the Shahnama? Faravurs?
Daqiqi was a historian who wrote in Pahlavi. He was a Zoroastrian, and we don't know much about him except that Firdausi has immortalized him by saying that he has taken all this, a portion of it. He writes a portion of it, and then he says, up to here, it was what Daqiqi had written in Nasr, that is, he had written in prose. I made it into poetry. So Daqiqi was a historian. He wrote it in prose, and Firdausi converted that into poetry, and the rest, after that portion, Firdausi adds his own. So we don't have much detailed information about Daqiqi, except that he was a Zarathustri, a historian, and lived before Firdausi, under the Arabs.
Hoshang also, Mariar, can you please email us Dr. Dala's comments on Vandidad? Be more than happy to. But let me just, for the benefit of everybody, read what he says. This is from his book, Ek Atmakatha, which is translated into English as The Saga of a Soul. It's his autobiography. And here's what he says. And I will certainly email it to you, no problem. If we were to express an unbiased opinion about the Vandidad, which is considered the most important book on ceremonials, it can be stated there is nothing like prayer or ceremony in it. Its 22 chapters contain completely irrelevant topics like the principal cities of Iran, King Jamshed, agriculture, taxation, systems of disposal of the dead, defilement, purification, barishnum, physicians' dues, social and economic laws, regulations regarding comfort and happiness, punishment ranging from 50 whippings to 10,000, other military crimes, care of dogs, customs of cutting the hair or nails, and reciting prayers prior to bearing them, pregnancy, menstruation, confinement, narration about Harivan's torment of Zarathustra, mantras to cure illness, etc. And yet the community squanders lakhs of rupees every year over the supposedly incomparable prayers of the Vandidad. 50 years ago, when I commenced my writing, my first book, Ravani Rabari, Guidance of the Soul, in the hope that Ahura Mazda may direct my pen and my thoughts, I had the ceremony performed through sheer ignorance. That was the first and the last time. My illusion that ceremonies fulfill desires in this mortal world and save the soul in the spiritual realm is now dispelled.
Now, you know why Vandidar has got the importance that it has today? It is because it was the first manuscript that we found and was translated in India. Because it was the first that we found, and because it was translated, and we basically, it said, everything it says is that Ahura Mazda said to Zarathustra. So it was very important because this is the talk between Ahura Mazda and Zarathustra. And so it became the most important book that we had at that time in the 1600s. And that tradition has lived till today without understanding the meaning, without having the need to do that. In India, it has become, in Iran, they don't have Vandidat ceremonies like they have in India, where they spend the whole night doing the Vandidat. In Iran, they don't.
So do we believe that really the Vandidat is what Ahura Mazda said to Zarathustra?
Even the Gathas, Zarathustra has not even given the Gathas directly to Zarathustra. The Gathas are the thoughts of Zarathustra.
Okay.
Even that is not given by Zarathustra. And
Zarathustra
nowhere does he claim that. Nowhere does
Zarathustra
Zarathustra
says,
claim that.
I saw you, Ahura Mazda, in my mind's eye. I saw you within me. And even Dasturala says in one of his books, to reach God, you have to go within yourself. To go deep inside yourself. Khuda, right. To go inside yourself, find God within you. Dasturala was a phenomenal guy, a fantastic guy, brilliant man.
So that means that the Vandidat is really not the words or not even the thoughts of Zarathustra. That's just a fabrication. Then.
Yes.
That's a municipal rule of the period.
Right.
You go to your city today, you go to your city and you say you want to open a restaurant, they'll give you a set of rules which are like the Vandidat.
Yeah.
Maruk, do you get Fazana?
Yes.
Okay. Then in the current issue, I'm not tooting my own horn, but in the current issue, on page 129, you'll see an article that I've written, the origin of the Vandidat, and that'll give you the answers to the questions that you raised.
Thank you. While I'm on the Fazana, is Ichapur Wala's book, The Songs of Zarathustra, still available through Fazana?
Tarapur Wala.
Iraj Tarapur Wala.
Yeah, you can go on my website and order it. They'll send it for you.
Thank you.
You go on my website on the book section, you can order it and we'll send it for you.
Okay,
Maruk, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I think listening to everyone and being on this class for the last several weeks, I think it gives me a good appreciation of what a challenge it has been for us. Because Zarathustra, when he went through his enlightenment, it was so abstract. It was a revolutionary thinking that he was introducing to mankind. And it was very difficult to articulate. And that's why perhaps he was challenged himself trying to convert people when he was trying to convey his thinking. So I guess I'm trying to say is I have great appreciation, even though Vandidat and all, I get it, I understand. But if it weren't for our priests, if it weren't for our mabeds during the Sassanian times to articulate, to do their best in trying to understand what Zarathustra's teachings today, we wouldn't be here today. And I think it's, as we move forward, if I have to look ahead and see what will Zoroastrianism be like in the next few years, I think there is a revival. I think there is a change in thinking again. And it's I don't know the answer to it, but perhaps this is the beginning of a dialogue, a beginning of a conversation that perhaps the North American Morbid Council can take on and give us more education, because this has been extremely educational for me, understanding our history and getting an idea. So I just wanted to leave that thought. And I thank you both very much, and to NAMC for bringing this on. So
Thank you.
The most important thing that the movements have done is memorizing the scriptures, whatever they had, and whenever they had. And that memorizing has given us today the Gathas, which is 99.9% original. And that is vouched by the scholars who have compared the language. Basically, Martin Haig, when he discovered the Gathas in 1859, he discovered it based on the language. So that means that the movements had preserved the language word by word. They had preserved this part. So if the Vandidas was written later or Dinka was written later, doesn't matter, because the Gathas that has come down, not the 20,000 that the Greeks were claiming, and for sure in 77 years, he must have written much more, but this 230 verses has come down to us word by word. And we should thank that to all our past movers and present movers who have had the practice of learning them by heart, and even as a prayer that has kept it intact.
Delphina has, are there sects in Zoroastrianism? Are there sects?
Plenty.
I lost it. If not, excuse me, if not, then why so many differences in prayers, festivals, culture in one religion? There are sects, unfortunately, and those are created, in my opinion, by people who have an agenda, and they want to promote themselves as gifts to humankind or gifts to Zoroastrians. So yeah, we do have sects, and I'll leave it at that. It just boils my blood when I hear of these things. Keki Patel, thank you, Mary Alfaribus, for sharing your knowledge and understanding of Zoroastrianism. A big thank you to NAMC IZS for this platform and sharing good understanding. Delphine, I totally agree with Maruk. I have learned so much in these weeks. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Hoshang Besania, a very big thank you, Mary Alfaribus, for sharing your knowledge with us. We learned a lot. Freddie, Vandirat is a Palvi term, which Avasta is Vidavedar, correct, or the laws of pollution. In our daily prayers, we pray Farvarane, Mas Deas Jarthostis, Vidavedat, Auratakesho, which we translated in general term as, I declare that I'm a Mazda worshipper, follower of Zarathustra, follow the laws against pollution as per the laws of our Mazda. And if there are no more questions, I want to thank you all for and you've been wonderful. It's been a pleasure. In the process, I think I learned a lot from Faribus and the questions that you asked. So really thank you. And certainly, as Keki said, a great thank you to NAMC, to Timton Mirza, and to Bombi Damkewala and Rohinton Rovatna.
Thank you.
You've been wonderful, and please stay in touch. You have my email address. You have Faribus' email address. Be more than happy to answer any questions at any time. Don't hesitate.
You have our emails. You can always feel free. And I thank NAMC especially for initiating this course and things that I always wanted to, I believed in. I could not openly say it because I didn't have proof of it. When this course was proposed to me, I went and looked for the books and found old writings from the 1800s, which supported my thought. And that is what you see in my writing material. I've quoted from books that are from the 1800s, nothing before, nothing after that. And thank you all for being here, listening to us, and giving us this opportunity to present this beautiful religion of ours.
It's been wonderful. It's really been a pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
So let me take a minute to thank Mariar and Faribus for doing this course. I think they have put in a lot of time, lot of energy, lot of effort, and we are so grateful for that. And hopefully we will bring them back with some other courses and keep them busy and educating us. So thank you again. Thank you for taking this course. Our new course, new courses are coming up from fall, from September onwards. So keep an eye for them. And also we would like you to please promote these courses. You know, the instructors put in a lot of time and effort, and we need to have as many people as possible taking these courses to they make benefit of their knowledge and wisdom. So thank you again. Okay, take care and keep well.
Delphina has a question. She wants to say something.
I wanted to know about the Shahnameh. There is a lecture on that. How can I register? Where can I find that?
Okay.
So Shahnameh is a course coming up. It starts on 11th. And if you need forms, our registrar, Bomi Damkewala, would be very happy to send it out to you.
I will send it out to you. We'll be closing the registration on Monday.
Okay.
So please fill it out right away.
Yeah. Okay.
I will send you the form right now in the next 10 minutes.
Right.
If anyone else wants the forms, please.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you
Bobby,
send one to
I
me
will
too?
also want.
Bobby, can you send us to everyone? Yeah.
Please.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. About 4 or 5 that are sitting here are already registered, like Fred and Kaki and Hoshang and
I
Maruk
have.
Tamboli are registered.
No,
Maruk
I haven't.
Mukafram, you're not.
No.
Right. Yeah, so
If you can
please do
send
it
it to me, I would be happy to.
very soon. And we've already got 16 people who are fully registered. So you'll be the additional ones, but I'll send it to everybody.
Thank you.
Not the ones
Thank
who
you,
are
Bobby.
already
Thank
registered.
The last question I have is perhaps to Tintin about the NAMC website. Is it, I wasn't able to access it.
So right now we are creating a new website. It's
Okay.
brand new, and therefore it's in transition. So we are moving from the old website to a brand new website with all modern features and all bells and whistles that I'm not very familiar with, but how it works. But so that's what's happening, and therefore we are experiencing some technical difficulties. But we intend to have it up and running in a few days. Okay, so keep on trying.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again very
Okay,
much.
thank you again. Thanks. Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.